Close your eyes. Imagine a world of candlelit drawing rooms, gentle horse-drawn carriages, and stolen glances across ballrooms. Tonight, we step into a tender tale of love, longing, and quiet grace. Let the soft breeze of Willowmere carry your thoughts into rest. The arrival at Willowmere Hall. The rain had stopped just an hour before their carriage crested the final hill toward Willowmere Hall. A faint mist lingered over the fields, rising in silver sheets from the moorland, curling gently through the hedgerows as if nature herself was sighing into spring. In the distance, the great house slowly emerged, a pale silhouette of stone and ivy, quiet and unassuming, with pointed gables and tall chimneys, softened by decades of weather and moss. Inside the coach, Lady Eleanor Whitmore sat with a book closed. In her lap, her gloved hands folded neatly upon it. She had not turned a page in over an hour, nor had she truly been reading. Her gaze remained fixed on the blurred glass window, where droplets traced faint paths over a landscape growing greener. With every mile, her mind, however, was still in London among the crowded parlors and whispered disappointments, where time passed in tea glances and the exhausting restraint of polite society. Across from her sat her younger sister Marianne, who was only just awakening from a brief nap. Her cheeks were flushed with the faint glow of sleep, and her curls had loosened slightly under her bonnet. As she opened her eyes, a sudden brightness lit her features, and she leaned toward the window eagerly. "Eleanor, look," she whispered. "The house, it's just ahead. Do you see the trees lining the drive? They're perfectly symmetrical." Eleanor followed her gaze. The trees were, indeed, neatly spaced and trimmed, though their branches had begun to droop from early spring growth. Willowmere had been spoken of with only modest description in the letter from Lord Dashfield, a comfortable estate with generous views and tolerable quiet. He had written, but to the sisters, who had lately known only the noise and restlessness of London, it promised peace. The coach rumbled down the gravel path, the wheels cracking softly against the stones. As they drew nearer, the hall became clearer, its tall windows set with slightly aged panes, a great front door of oak, flanked by two columns half covered in ivy, and a modest bell hanging from a wrought iron arm. It was not grand, not ostentatious, but rather dignified in its stillness, like a gentleman no longer in fashion, yet too proud to notice. Marianne could hardly contain her curiosity. "Do you suppose there's a piano? And a proper garden?" "Oh, Eleanor, I want to walk in it immediately. I'm sure the air here must be 100 times more honest than anything we've breathed in London." Eleanor smiled, but gently. "Let's arrive first, Marianne. You've not even set foot on the gravel." The coach slowed and came to a stop before the front steps. The door opened with the precise elegance that only practiced servants possess. A young footman offered his hand, and Eleanor stepped down, her boots crunching on the path, the air suddenly cooler and sweeter than she'd expected. Marianne followed, breathing deeply. A moment later, the great door of Willowmere opened, and there stood Lord Henry Dashfield. He was a man of perhaps 46, tall and thin, with a quiet demeanor that made him seem part of the architecture. His dark hair, now streaked with gray, was combed back with little care for vanity. He wore a long coat of dark wool, his cravat tied without flourish, and his expression bore the subtle fatigue of someone used to managing large houses and small conversations. "Ladies Whitmore," he said with a courteous bow, "welcome to Willowmere. I hope your journey was endurable." "It was smooth, thank you, Lord Dashfield," Eleanor replied. Her voice was soft but composed, with the measured grace that made men admire her without ever quite daring to court her. Marianne, ever warmer in her greetings, offered a curtsy too deep for the moment. "The countryside is absolutely lovely, my lord. I can't wait to see the gardens. I imagine they are still recovering from the winter, but you may find them tolerable," Lord Dashfield replied, with a faint smile that flickered across his lips but did not linger. "Come in. Mrs. Lovell will show you to your rooms." The sisters entered the house and were met by an older woman in gray, Mrs. Lovell, the housekeeper. Her manner was brisk but not unkind. She led them through the foyer with efficiency, pointing out the drawing room, the library, and the narrow staircase that wound toward the east wing. "You'll find your trunks already placed. The fire has been laid in both rooms, though you may want extra shawls tonight. The stone keeps a chill well into May," she said. "Thank you, Mrs. Lovell," Eleanor said, and Marianne smiled brightly, already gazing out of a passing window toward the back gardens. Their rooms were connected by a shared grand arrangement that Marianne adored. Eleanor's room was a shade more austere, with simple curtains and a walnut writing desk tucked beneath the window. Marianne's, though similar in size, was livelier in character. Floral upholstery, a small pianoforte in the corner, and a vase already filled with fresh violets. "Oh, Eleanor," Marianne cried, stepping in. "This room must have been prepared by someone with real taste." Eleanor followed behind. "It's charming, but you mustn't judge a room until you've slept in its bed and seen its corners in moonlight." The sisters spent the rest of the afternoon settling in. As they unpacked their gowns and slippers, the quiet of the house wrapped around them like a thick quilt. There was no rush, no bells, no pressing invitations, only the sound of the wind through the budding trees and the occasional creak of distant floorboards. The evening meal was served in the smaller dining room, a space more intimate than the grand hall, with deep burgundy drapes and a long table. That seemed too large for the three who sat at it. Lord Dashfield did not talk much. He asked about their journey, inquired whether they found their rooms comfortable, and made a passing remark about the decline of letter writing among the younger generation. Eleanor answered with quiet eloquence, and Marianne chimed in with excitement about the countryside, though she quickly learned that her host preferred understatement. Asterisk, asterisk, it's a fine house, Marianne said brightly, though I think the garden path could be greatly improved with roses. Have you thought of planting more color near the terrace? Lord Dashfield looked at her with a faintly amused expression. Roses have a tendency to grow unruly without purpose, Miss Marianne. Precisely why they are so beautiful, she replied, without hesitation. He offered no reply but a single arched brow, and Marianne, undeterred, smiled into her soup. After dinner, they retired to the drawing room. A fire burned low in the hearth. Lord Dashfield sat with a book, or pretending to, and the sisters occupied the settee near the window. The air was thick with that gentle silence only old houses possess, and Eleanor found it surprisingly soothing. Marianne, however, was restless. She approached the pianoforte, gently lifted the lid, and ran her fingers over the keys. May I? She asked. Lord Dashfield looked up. If you wish, she played quietly simple tunes, no bravado, allowing the notes to drift into the corners of the room like perfume. Eleanor closed her eyes, letting the music and the firelight lull her senses. Asterisk, asterisk, when the music stopped, Lord Dashfield stood and excused himself. Mrs. Lovell will bring you tea, if you like, he said. I tend to retire early. And with that, he was gone, leaving the sisters alone in the hush of the room, where the shadows began to stretch and flicker along the walls. Later, as the candles burned low and the house grew still, Eleanor and Marianne sat in their nightgowns by the small hearth between their rooms, wrapped in shawls and drinking tea that had long since cooled. Well, Marianne whispered, what do you make of him, Lord Dashfield? Eleanor stirred her cup. He is difficult to read, stoic, reserved, tragic. All the signs of a man with a sorrowful heart, Marianne said dramatically. Mark my words, beneath that gray cravat beats a passionate soul. Eleanor laughed softly. You've known him scarcely half a day, and yet I am rarely wrong. Eleanor didn't answer. Her gaze turned to the fireplace, where the coals pulsed softly like a fading memory. Outside, a soft rain had begun again, just enough to whisper against the glass. And in that quiet moment, the sisters both felt it, not quite belonging, but not quite being strangers either. As if Willowmere Hall had drawn them in, not simply as guests, but as part of a story not yet written. One shaped by quiet glances, old regrets, and perhaps, with time, love, asterisk, asterisk. Morning in the garden, and the man by the lake the next morning arrived softly, as though it had tiptoed through the meadows rather than swept in from the east. The air was still damp from the night's drizzle, but the clouds had begun to peel away, like gauze, revealing the pale gold of a reluctant spring sun. Birdsong filtered through the window panes, faint, fragmented, like a music box playing in the distance. Marianne was the first to stir. She sat up in bed, her hair loosed about her shoulders, and for a moment, she simply listened. There was a peace to Willowmere that she had not felt in years. Not in the crowded rooms of London, not at assemblies or card parties, not even in the delicate solitude of poetry. This was a different quiet. It didn't ask anything of her. It simply allowed her to be. She dressed without fuss, slipping into a soft muslin morning gown, and tied her bonnet with a gentle hand. Eleanor was still, asleep, her face turned toward the wall, her expression untroubled in the dim morning light. Marianne smiled and moved quietly, so as not to wake her downstairs. The house was already waking. Mrs. Lovell's footsteps echoed faintly in the hall. A housemaid passed with a basket of linens. A fire crackled modestly in the hearth of the breakfast room, where Lord Dashfield sat with a single cup of tea, a slice of bread untouched on the plate before him. Good morning, Miss Marianne, he said, not rising. Good morning, my lord, she replied, curtsying politely. You're up early. I find sleep has less to offer me these days. She nodded, unsure how to answer that, and accepted a slice of warm toast from the silver rack near the hearth. After a few minutes of shared silence, Marianne stood and said, Would you mind terribly if I walked in the gardens before breakfast? They're yours to explore, he said simply, not looking up from his paper. You'll find the back terrace leads to a gravel path. Beyond that is the orchard. And then if you have patience for a longer walk, the lake. Thank you, she said. The lake sounds lovely. He nodded once and turned a page. Outside, the air was clean and fragrant with damp earth and early blooms. Marianne walked slowly at first, savoring each sound, the gravel beneath her feet, the breeze slipping through branches, the soft plop of water dripping from hedge. She passed through the main garden, its flower beds only beginning to stir from winter's hold. and descended the narrow path toward the orchard. The trees there were still mostly bare, but the beginnings of apple blossoms had started to emerge, buds of pink and white, clinging to dark limbs like secrets waiting to be told. Beyond the orchard, the path widened into a gentle slope, flanked by low stone walls covered in moss. At the foot of the hill, tucked between two weeping willows, was the lake. It shimmered softly in the morning light, its surface smooth except for the occasional ripple made by wind or a distant bird landing. Briefly before taking off again, Marianne approached slowly, her boots sinking into the softened earth. She inhaled deeply, then exhaled through parted lips, as if letting go of something she hadn't known she'd been carrying. She felt alone, but not lonely. The world here was whole, quiet, honest. And then, she saw him. A man stood near the far edge of the lake, close enough that she could make out his figure, but too far to see his face clearly. He was tall, his coat dark, his posture relaxed as he looked out over the water. He held a walking stick, not out of necessity, but in the absent-minded way of someone who walks often and thinks even more. She paused, her breath caught not out of fear, but from a feeling she couldn't yet name. The man turned, as though sensing her presence. Their eyes met across the lake. He didn't wave, he didn't call out, he simply nodded a slow, acknowledging gesture and then turned back to the water. Marianne remained where she was, uncertain whether to go forward or retreat. The moment felt suspended, like a note at the end of a musical phrase that hadn't yet resolved. Then, without a word, the man turned and began to walk along the path that circled the lake, eventually disappearing behind the trees. She stood there for a long time after he was gone. Back at the house, Eleanor had awakened to find her sister's bed empty. She dressed and made her way to breakfast, where Marianne entered just as she was pouring her tea. "You're out early," Eleanor said. "I couldn't sleep," Marianne replied. "The lake is beautiful. You must see it. You found it." Then, "Yes, it's beyond the orchard, past the path with the mossy walls." Eleanor smiled. "It sounds exactly like something you'd seek out." "There was someone there," Marianne added quietly, stirring her tea. "Oh, a man. Tall, dark coat. He didn't speak to me, just looked, and then walked away." Eleanor studied her sister's face. "Did he frighten you?" "No, not at all. It was strange, like meeting someone in a dream." "Did you recognize him?" Marianne shook her head. "No, but I'm certain he wasn't a servant. He moved like someone accustomed to being watched." Eleanor sipped her tea thoughtfully. "Perhaps a guest of Lord Dashfield's." "Perhaps," Marianne said, though she wasn't convinced. Later, that day, the sisters were invited to tea in the drawing room, where Lord Dashfield sat reading beside the window. "Have you settled in comfortably?" he asked. "Yes, thank you," Eleanor replied. "The rooms are lovely." "In the gardens?" he asked, glancing at Marianne. "They are enchanting," she said. "I walked to the lake this morning." He raised a brow. "I trust it wasn't too muddy." "Not terribly. It was peaceful. I saw someone there, actually, a man." At that, a flicker crossed Lord Dashfield's expression, gone as quickly as it had come. He looked down at his teacup and said, "Likely my cousin. He walks often." "Your cousin?" Eleanor asked. "Mr. Nathaniel Ashcombe," he said, not looking at them. "He's staying in the South Wing for a few weeks. Lost his mother last year, took to wandering since." "I see," Eleanor said, but Marianne said nothing. The name meant nothing to her, but something about it, perhaps the way Lord Dashfield had said it, almost begrudgingly piqued her interest. Later, as she sat by the window in her room, watching the evening turn the sky to pale violet, Marianne thought again of the man by the lake. There had been something about the way he stood, something quiet, inward, and thoughtful, something familiar. She opened her notebook and began to write. "I saw a man in morning's hush, among the willows weeping rush. He looked at me, then looked away, and yet his silence seemed to stay." Downstairs, in a quiet corner of the library, Lord Dashfield stood alone by the fireplace, staring into the flames. He held a letter in his hand, a crumpled, folded thing that had been read too many times. His fingers tightened around it, then loosened again. Behind him, the door creaked. "Open, you didn't tell them the truth," came a low voice. Lord Dashfield turned. There was no need to. Mr. Nathaniel Ashcombe stepped into the light. He was younger than Dashfield by at least a decade, with dark hair, a lean frame, and a sharpness to his features softened only by the weary elegance in his eyes. "They'll know, eventually," Ashcombe said. "Let them wonder a little longer," Lord Dashfield replied. "It's been quiet here for some time. Let's not disturb it." Ashcombe looked into the fire. "The younger one saw me." "Yes," Dashfield said. "She mentioned it." Ashcombe's gaze didn't shift. "She reminds me of someone." "I imagine she does." That night, as Willowmere Hall settled into its usual silence, Marianne lay awake, staring at the ceiling. Eleanor had long since fallen asleep, her breathing soft and rhythmic, but Marianne's mind was full not with worry, but with wonder. Asterisk, asterisk, there was a man by the lake. He had not spoken, yet she remembered everything about him. And somehow, she knew, This was not the last time they would meet. A conversation in passing that Next morning dawned cooler, though the light was clearer and more determined than the day before. Birds sang brighter melodies in the garden, and the trees just days away from bursting into full bloom rustled with the soft promise of spring. Eleanor awoke to find Marianne already dressed, perched near the window like a painting in motion. Her hair had been loosely pinned, and she wore a sky blue morning dress, simple and fresh, her gaze fixed on something outside. "You're up early again," Eleanor murmured, stretching. "I couldn't sleep," Marianne said. "There's something different in the air today. Don't you feel it?" Eleanor stood slowly. "I feel that you're determined to catch a cold if you sit by that window much longer." Marianne smiled faintly but didn't look away. She didn't need to tell her sister what, or rather, whom she was hoping to see. Breakfast was served, as before, in quiet. Lord Dashfield kept to himself, sipping weak tea and only occasionally glancing at the sisters as if confirming they still existed in his house. He had no comment about Marianne's early rising, nor did he inquire about her previous encounter at the lake. But there was, in the way he avoided her gaze, something unsaid. Asterisk. After the meal, Marianne took her shawl and walked without invitation. She knew where she was going, past the flower beds, through the orchard's crooked limbs, down the mossy path, and finally to the silver lake, nestled in the valley. She found it nearly unchanged. The water was still, the trees leaned gently over the shore, and across the lake, just as she had somehow known, stood Mr. Nathaniel Ashcombe. This time, he noticed her approach. He straightened slightly, as if debating whether to greet her or vanish again into the woods. But Marianne kept walking, slow but certain, her boots tracing careful steps through the softening soil. They met near the edge of the water. He bowed, a motion formal but unpracticed, as if dusted off from years of disuse. "Good morning," she said softly. "Good morning, Miss Whitmore," he replied. His voice was deeper than she expected, but not harsh, controlled, deliberate, even as it trembled slightly on her name. "You know my name?" "I asked," he said simply. She studied his face, lean, thoughtful, marked with weariness around the eyes, yet somehow still gentle. It was the face of someone who had seen grief and walked beside silence long enough to find its language. "And you are Lord Dashfield's cousin?" she asked. "Yes, Nathaniel Ashcombe," he said, no more. Marianne waited, expecting some remark about the garden, the weather, her early walk, but he offered nothing. Instead, he stood in the quiet, as if conversation were something he had forgotten. "How to do, it's beautiful here," she said, filling the silence. "The lake, the orchard, the breeze. You're very fortunate to have such solitude." He nodded. "Fortunate, yes, though sometimes solitude is more a choice made by others." "On your behalf," Marianne tilted her head. "That sounds rather lonely." "It can be." A pause. "But not this morning," he added, and looked at her for the first time, not across a lake, not in passing, but truly looked. Marianne felt the warmth rush to her cheeks. They walked together, slowly circling the lake. The conversation was hesitant at first. She spoke of the countryside, of her longing to leave behind the din of London, of the endless noise and shallow conversation. He listened, asked few questions, but never seemed disinterested. She asked about his time at Willowmere. "I've been here only 2 weeks," he said, "though it feels longer." "Do you enjoy it?" "I endure it," he said, with a half-dashed smile. Marianne frowned. "Surely it's not so dreadful." "No, not dreadful. Just distant. People are kind, but they look at me as though I've been injured, or that I might vanish if they speak too loudly." Marianne looked down. "I know what that's like." He turned to her. "Do you?" She nodded. "I lost someone. Once. Someone I thought I loved. And afterward, people treated me as though I were made of glass. Either they avoided the subject altogether, or clumsily tried to help. But their kindness was noise. It made me feel far away." He said nothing at first, but his expression softened. "I lost my mother," he said at last. "It was sudden. Illness. Nothing dramatic. But the house grew very quiet afterward. Not just from grief, but from the way no one knew what to say anymore." "And so you came here?" "Yes." They reached a small wooden bench beneath a willow tree, by overgrown branches. Marianne sat without asking. He hesitated, then joined her, leaving a polite space between them. They sat for a long while in silence, but it was not uncomfortable. The wind rustled above, and a few birds sang from the reeds at the lake's edge. Marianne closed her eyes, briefly, and breathed deeply. "It's strange," she said after a while. "What is? I feel like I've known you longer than 20 minutes. Nathaniel looked away, hiding a flicker of emotion. "Maybe some people meet in years, and others, in moments." She smiled. "That sounds like something from a novel." "Then forgive me." "No," she said. "I liked it." They walked back slowly. Near the orchard they paused. "Will you walk here again tomorrow?" she asked. He nodded. "If the weather allows, then I shall hope for fair skies." She turned then and left him standing among the apple trees. That afternoon, Eleanor noticed the change. Marianne hummed as she stitched. She smiled more, Her gaze lingered on the windows as though expecting something beautiful to appear at any moment. And though she said nothing, Eleanor knew. *** in the drawing room. Lord Dashfield looked up from his book as Marianne entered. "You walked again today?" he asked. "Yes," she said simply. He raised a brow. "And did you find the lake as peaceful as before?" She smiled, even more so. "I imagine Mr. Ashcombe was agreeable company." Marianne's smile faded slightly. "He was thoughtful, kind." Lord Dashfield returned to his book. "Kindness is often mistaken for affection," he murmured. Marianne said nothing, but her heart beat just a little faster. That night, in their shared sitting room, Eleanor and Marianne sat by the fire. "Who is he?" Eleanor asked softly. Marianne looked up. "Mr. Ashcombe, yes. But what of him? Is he charming? Kind? Honest?" "He is. Unlike anyone I've met." Eleanor studied her. "That can be dangerous." Marianne shrugged. "So can breathing." Elsewhere, in the hall, Nathaniel Ashcombe stood alone by the window in the south wing, staring out across the garden. In his hand, he held a letter he had begun, but not finished. He read the opening line again. "Dear Mother, I met someone today who reminded me that not all silences are empty." He folded it carefully, set it on the desk, and stared into the night. The echoes of memory and the arrival of a stranger the days that followed moved like pages, turning in a book that only Marianne could read. Mornings brought her to the lake. Sometimes she arrived before Nathaniel Ashcombe, other times after, but never once did he fail to come. And though their conversations remained tender, light, and free of any declarations, they carried an emotional weight that seemed to thicken with each passing day. Eleanor, observant by nature and protective by habit, noticed the subtle shifts in her sister's demeanor. There was a lightness in Marianne, now a softness returned to her voice that Eleanor hadn't heard since before London. But with that lightness came worry. Marianne was quick to fall, quicker to dream, and slowest of all to protect herself. One morning, over tea, Eleanor finally addressed it. "You've spent much time walking," she said gently, though her words were pointed. Marianne smiled as she reached for the sugar bowl. "Yes, and it has done me good. Eleanor," she added, after a pause, "do not look at me as if I were about to leap off a cliff. I look at you with love," Eleanor said, "and with caution. You know how quickly a heart like yours moves ahead of reason. I am not the girl I was, Eleanor. Perhaps not, but you are still made of feeling. I worry that he is not." Marianne's smile faltered. She stirred her tea without looking up. "He is quiet, but I don't mistake that for absence. I think his quiet is full." Eleanor considered this and said nothing more. Nathaniel, too, was changing, though he barely understood it himself. He had come to Willowmere seeking only stillness, perhaps even escape. And yet now, with Marianne's presence gently warming the cold corners of his world, he found himself awakening. Her laughter had begun to echo in his thoughts even after she left. Her poetry read aloud as they walked stirred feelings he had long forgotten could exist. She spoke of stars and meanings, of music and longing. She treated the world as if it were a letter written to her alone, and he had never met anyone who lived so unapologetically close to the edge of beauty. Still, he kept his distance, not in body, but in truth. There were things she didn't know, things about him, his family, his inheritance that remained shrouded in silence. He didn't know how to tell her, or whether he ever should. It was on the 5th day of their walks that he almost said it. They had paused at their bench beneath the willow. She was reading a poem, Wordsworth. He thought, but he wasn't truly listening to the lines. He was watching her mouth, her eyes, the way the sunlight caught the loose strands of hair near her ear. "I never thought I would know peace again," he said suddenly, interrupting her verse. She looked up, startled by the seriousness in his voice. "But now," he continued, "it finds me in the strangest places. In the curve of your hand, in the sound of your steps behind me, in the way you hum when you think I'm not listening." Marianne didn't speak, but her expression changed, softened, filled with something between surprise and understanding. He opened his mouth again to say something more, to tell her what he hadn't told anyone, but before he could, the sound of hooves broke the silence. A rider appeared on the distant path near the orchard. He was moving quickly, the horse kicking, up a trail of dust and damp leaves. Marianne and Nathaniel both stood as the figure approached, dismounting near the top of the slope with practiced grace. It was Colonel Edmund Harwood, tall, strong-jawed, with the unmistakable air of military precision. He wore a green coat that clung to his broad shoulders. His boots were muddied from the road, but his composure was impeccable. He approached with purpose. "Miss Whitmore," he said with a bow. "Lord Dashfield said I might find you here." Marianne blinked. "Colonel Harwood, I didn't know you were expected." "I was not," he replied, "but I bring a message from your mother. She's well, but asked me to deliver news in person." She frowned. "Is it urgent?" "No," he said, glancing briefly at Nathaniel. "But she worried letters would not find you promptly, and as I was already passing through Hampshire." His voice trailed off. Nathaniel stepped forward politely. "Ashcombe," he said, offering his hand. Harwood, the colonel replied, shaking it. There was a pause, brief but sharp. Something passed between them in that moment. Not quite hostility, but perhaps recognition. They were very different men, and they both seemed to know it. I will return to the hall, Nathaniel said, nodding to Marianne. She watched him go, the way his shoulders looked somehow heavier than they had before. Then she turned to Harwood. What did my mother wish to say? That your cousin Catherine has announced her engagement. Marianne smiled. At last, she has been waiting nearly 2 years. She asked that you return home for the celebration, Harwood added, but only if you wish it. I see. They walked together back toward the house. The conversation was light, harmless. Harwood spoke of roads, regiments, and new horses at the stables. But Marianne's heart was not in the words. That night, she did not sleep well. Eleanor was pleased by Colonel Harwood's arrival, though it surprised her. She had met him once before in town and found him respectable, intelligent, and kind. He was a man of few extravagances and many principles, a reliable suitor. If ever, Marianne would consider one. But as the days passed, it became clear to Eleanor that something was shifting. Nathaniel withdrew, not rudely, not abruptly, but he was no longer at the lake in the morning, no longer appeared in the garden. When Marianne asked Lord Dashfield whether Mr. Ashcombe was unwell, he only said, he prefers his solitude again. Perhaps it was foolish to think he'd ever leave. It ticked. Marianne felt the sting of abandonment, but more than that, confusion. Had she imagined it all? Had he not spoken those words beneath the willow? Or had the presence of another man, one more polished, more suitable, caused Nathaniel to retreat back into silence? 3 days after Colonel Harwood's arrival, Marianne went to the lake alone. The air was cooler. A wind had picked up, and the trees whispered like gossips. The bench beneath the willow was empty, the water still. She sat for a long time. Finally, she opened her notebook and wrote, "The lake is quiet now, as though it mourns a voice that once stood here beside mine. I speak, and silence answers." Elsewhere in the house, Nathaniel sat in the library with Lord Dashfield. "She's confused," Henry said, not unkindly. "She deserves clarity." Nathaniel replied, "You won't give it to her." "I don't know how." Dashfield studied him. "You were not made for silence. Cousin, you were made for music, for something more than mourning." Nathaniel looked away. "But mourning is all I know." "Then perhaps it's time you learned something else." Eleanor, and the weight of words, the rain began mid-mornings, low and steady, like fingers tapping gently on the window panes of Willowmere Hall. It was not a dramatic storm, but a soft, persistent drizzle that turned the garden silver and blurred the trees in the distance. The whole estate seemed to sigh beneath its weight and within its walls. Conversation fell quiet. Marianne sat by the drawing-room fire, her notebook open on her lap, though the pages remained blank. She stared not at the hearth, but into her thoughts, which now twisted like vines, frustrating and unyielding. Across the room, Eleanor set down her embroidery and quietly observed her sister. "Would you like tea?" she asked gently. "No, thank you," Marianne replied without looking up. A pause hung in the air. Then perhaps a walk. A cloak and boots would make the rain manageable. "I would rather not," Marianne said. "The rain feels uninviting today." Eleanor's voice softened further. "But perhaps it's not the rain you find unwelcome." Marianne closed her notebook with a sigh. "Must you always observe me like a physician inspecting a wound?" Eleanor smiled faintly. "Only because I know the wound is still healing, and lately, perhaps reopening." Marianne turned toward her sister. "He's avoiding me, Eleanor. I don't know why." I thought she stopped herself, then sighed again. "It's as if he's disappeared into himself, like a man who leaves a letter unfinished." "You care for him," Eleanor said quietly, but Marianne nodded. "More than I expected, more than I should, perhaps." Eleanor considered this, then rose. From her chair, she moved to the window, watching the rain streak down the glass like threads unraveling from the sky. "I will speak to him," she said after a moment. Marianne looked up sharply. "You," Eleanor nodded. "Not as your sister, not to defend or demand, but simply to understand. Sometimes it is easier to tell the truth to someone not entangled in your heart." That afternoon, while Marianne remained cloistered in her room, Eleanor made her way to the south wing. The corridors there were darker, narrower, lined with shelves of books and old portraits whose eyes seemed to follow one's footsteps. She found Nathaniel Ashcombe in the library, standing by the tall windows, one hand resting on the windowsill, the other holding an untouched book. He turned as she entered and bowed. Miss Whitmore, he said respectfully. "To what do I owe the visit?" "I came to speak," Eleanor replied, walking calmly toward the hearth. "May I?" He nodded and gestured toward the chair opposite his. "Please." They sat. For a moment, there was only the sound of the fire, crackling softly in the grate, and the occasional tap of rain against the windows. "You've been absent," Eleanor said at last, without accusation. "Yes," he admitted. "I have." "Was it deliberate?" He hesitated. "Yes." "May I ask why?" Nathaniel looked away. "Because I thought it was the kindest thing I could do." Eleanor studied him. For whom? He met her eyes. For her, And why do you think your absence is kindness? Because my presence stirs hope, he said, his voice lower, and I am not certain I have anything to offer. Eleanor was silent for a moment, then replied, hope is not cruel. Silence is that struck something in him. He looked down, shame creeping across his expression. I have carried my grief for a long time, he said finally. I've made it into something almost familiar, something that explains my quiet, my hesitations. But she is light. And I don't know how to offer that light anything but shadow. She doesn't want a mirror, Eleanor said. She wants a partner, someone who sees the world as she does, even if from another angle. Nathaniel rested his head briefly in his hand. You speak wisely. I speak as a sister, Eleanor said, and as someone who once lost love because I waited too long to say what needed saying. He looked at her again, more intently now. Then what should I say? He asked. Eleanor rose. That depends on what you feel. If your silence is meant to protect her, say so. If it's meant to distance yourself, then say that, too. But do not let her wonder. She deserves certainty, and if it hurts. He stood as well. She told you of our walks. Eleanor nodded. Every moment. He smiled faintly. She is extraordinary. She is. Eleanor agreed. But even the extraordinary need truth. With that, she left him in the library, alone with his thoughts and the echo of her words. That evening, as the rain softened into mist and the moon glowed faintly behind thin clouds, Marianne sat in the music room, idly running her fingers along the piano keys. She did not play, just let the notes hum under her touch, like memories half remembered. The door creaked behind her. She turned. Nathaniel stood there, his coat slightly damp, his eyes tired but determined. I hope I'm not intruding, he said. She said nothing, just waited. He stepped forward. I owe you an explanation, he began, or, at the very least, an apology. Marianne closed the piano lid gently. You owe me only honesty, she said. He nodded. I left because I was afraid of how much I felt, of how much you made me feel, and of what I might bring into your life that you do not deserve. She stood slowly. And what do you imagine I deserve? Laughter, joy, simplicity, not a man weighed down by the past. She stepped toward him. You think me so delicate. No, he said. I think you too radiant to live in the shadows I carry. She reached for his hand. Then let me be light, she said. Not to banish your shadows, but to walk beside them. He looked down at her hand in his voice barely above a whisper. I have not known peace until I knew you. Then don't run from it, she said. Not again. He brought her hand to his lips, gently, and in that moment, beneath the soft glow of candlelight and the quiet hush of the rain beyond the window, something unspoken settled between them. Not a promise, not yet, but a beginning. End of section 5. Shall I continue with section 6? 2,000 plus words. Next. The next chapter will focus on the announcement of a ball at Willowmere Hall, elegant, candlelit affair that brings the entire house to life and tests the boundaries of new affection, jealousy, and choice. The Willowmere ball. The sun returned the next morning, as if it, too, had overheard the quiet reconciliation in the music room. It broke through the thinning clouds and draped Willowmere Hall in a fresh warmth. The gardens shimmered with raindrops. The gravel paths dried in soft golden patches. And inside the house, there was a new buzz of preparation. An invitation had arrived the night before from the Montvilles, a neighboring family of dignified pedigree and genteel tastes. They were hosting their annual spring ball, a tradition older than some of the trees on their estate. And this year, Willowmere's residents were named among the honored guests. Marianne received the news with mixed emotion. Her heart still trembled. From the words Nathaniel had spoken, the quiet honesty, the confession veiled in metaphor. They had not kissed, they had not promised anything. And yet, something had changed in the very marrow of her hope. Now, a ball loomed, with all its silks and spectacles, and with it came questions. Would Nathaniel dance? Would he speak openly now that silence had broken? Would this evening be a beginning or an ending? Preparations began at once. In her chamber, Marianne stood before the full-length mirror while her maid, Alice, laid out dresses with gentle ceremony. Fabrics of periwinkle, ivory, and soft rose draped across the bed, each glowing with its own mood. This one, Miss Alice said, holding up a gown of midnight blue. It brings out your eyes. Marianne tilted her head. It also brings out my nerves. Alice smiled. You'll steal hearts tonight. Just don't let anyone steal yours without a fight. Down the hall, Eleanor dressed with her usual calm. She selected a soft sage gown, neither flashy nor plain, and styled her hair in a simple twist. But when Marianne entered the room, wrapped in that moonlit blue, her curls pinned high with pearls, Eleanor's breath caught slightly. You look older, she said gently, but in the best way. Marianne smiled. I feel older, or perhaps just more awake. And him, I don't know yet. The Montville estate was a 30-minute ride by carriage, and by the time Willowmere's party arrived, twilight had surrendered to the golden glow of 100 lanterns. Their coach rolled up to a grand front portico where footmen waited in powdered wigs and scarlet coats. Marianne stepped out last, her hand trembling slightly as she took the footman's hand. The air smelled of lilac and distant music. Inside, the ballroom shimmered. Chandeliers hung like starlight from the ceiling. The walls were lined with tall mirrors, doubling the number of guests and amplifying every flicker of candlelight. Violinists played a delicate prelude, and couples already circled in stately rhythm across the marble floor. Marianne stood at the threshold, her heart pounding. Then, from across the room, she saw him, Nathaniel. He stood in the corner, not dressed in brilliant colors like the younger men, but in a dark coat that suited him, clean fitted and understated. His hair was neatly brushed, and his eyes were already on her. She didn't smile. She couldn't. Her breath caught somewhere between delight and disbelief. But she moved toward him. Others moved around her, guests greeting, laughter chiming, servants offering glasses of sparkling cordial, but she only saw him. When she reached him, he bowed. Miss Whitmore. Mr. Ashcombe, you came. Of course. I was afraid. Well, never mind. Are you asking me to dance, Mr. Ashcombe? A smile flickered across his face. Yes. He offered his hand. She took it. They moved slowly to the floor as the musicians transitioned into a waltz. Other dancers made way. Sensing something unspoken between the two figures, now at the center of attention, they began to move. The first steps were cautious. Marianne's gloved hand rested lightly and his other hand gently supported her back. Their eyes remained fixed, not on their feet, not on the others, but on each other. Asterisk around them. The world faded. Music swelled. Time bent. In the corner, Eleanor watched quietly. Colonel Harwood stood beside her. He had asked her to dance earlier, and she had declined, preferring to observe the room's shifting energies. You're watching them, he said. I am. Should I be worried? Not unless you hope to win a heart already given. He tilted his head. You speak plainly. I have no reason to do otherwise. The colonel smiled. I admire that, even if it stings. They stood in silence for a moment, then he added, perhaps you might still consider one dance as a distraction. She looked at him. Very well. Back on the floor, Marianne and Nathaniel completed their dance. As the music drifted into silence, applause rose gently around them, but they didn't notice. He kept her hand a moment longer before leading her quietly from the floor toward a quiet alcove behind a pair of curtains. There among the velvet shadows, he turned to her. I've never danced in public before, he confessed. You did beautifully. You make it easy. She smiled. I want to say something, he said, then say it. I thought I had lost the part of me that could feel this, that could want this, but you've reminded me. She waited. I have nothing to offer you but honesty, he said. No title, no vast estate, only my mind, my heart, and what pieces remain of the man I once was. Marianne stepped closer. I don't want perfection, she whispered, only presence. He exhaled softly, like something inside him had been loosened. Then she said, there is one thing I must know. What is it? If you leave again, if you vanish into your silence, I may not be able to forgive it. I won't leave again, he said, unless you ask me to. I won't, she said. He lifted her hand and kissed it, not quickly, not formally, but slowly, like someone savoring a promise. Later that night, back at Willowmere, the sisters sat once more by the fire. Marianne said nothing. She simply smiled. Eleanor, watching her, felt something unexpected, a pang of envy. Yes, but also peace. Her sister had found something rare, something gentle, something she hadn't dared hope for again. Eleanor stood and kissed the top of Marianne's head. Sleep well, she said. I will. And she did. A letter from the city, the morning after the Montville ball, arrived like the hush following a song. There were no violins, no candlelight, no rustling silks, only the quiet breath of spring slipping in through cracked windows and the soft creak of Willowmere Hall stirring itself awake. Marianne lay in bed longer than usual. The dance from the night before replayed in her mind like a favorite verse. Her cheeks still warmed, remembering the feel of Nathaniel's hand at the small of her back, the gentle press of his lips against her gloved fingers. It had not been a kiss in the usual sense, but it had spoken volumes. She had heard in it all the things he had not said aloud. Asterisk. Still, when she rose and opened her shutters, a clouded sky greeted her. Not the kind that promised rain, but the sort that hung with indecision. It was a quiet grayness, like the pause before someone delivers important news. Downstairs, the mood at breakfast was different. Eleanor sat at the table, her usual poise now tinged with a faint furrow in her brow. A letter sat beside her plate, its seal broken, its edges trembling as if from the weight of its contents. Marianne entered the room, cheeks still flushed with memories of the night before. But her smile faded when she saw her sister's expression. Is it? She asked, gently touching the edge of the letter. Eleanor glanced at her. A letter from London. From our aunt. Marianne took her seat. Bad news. Eleanor hesitated. Not in the immediate sense, but complicated. She passed her the letter. Marianne scanned it quickly. Her aunt's familiar script spoke of social obligations, upcoming events, and most notably Lord Charles Bellamy. Lord Bellamy, Marianne echoed aloud. Eleanor nodded. It appears he has returned from Italy and is asking after you. Marianne's heart didn't race, it paused. After me, yes. Aunt says he inquired specifically where you had gone. She suspects he wishes to renew acquaintance. Marianne exhaled. Lord Bellamy was a name from the pages of a chapter she thought closed. A man of wealth, wit, and standing, he had shown interest in her during their final weeks in the city. But Marianne had felt no spark, and when she had left for the country, she hadn't spared him more than a courteous goodbye. But now, why would he seek me out? She asked, more to herself than Eleanor. Eleanor's voice was gentle but measured. Perhaps he means to propose. Marianne blinked. We barely knew one another. In society, that's not always an obstacle. No, Marianne said softly, but in love, it's everything. The rest of the day moved like a carriage slowed by mud. Marianne tried to distract herself, walked in the garden, reread old poems, even tried sketching, but the name Bellamy trailed her like a perfume she hadn't asked to wear. By mid-afternoon, Nathaniel arrived at the hall. He was dressed simply, but his presence still shifted the air. Eleanor met him at the door. She's in the orchard, she told him, but there's something you should know. He listened closely as she spoke of the letter. She didn't dramatize. She didn't warn him. She merely gave him the truth. He nodded quietly, thanked her, and went to find Marianne. She was sitting beneath the apple tree when he approached, her back resting against its gnarled trunk, her face turned skyward. He didn't speak until she noticed him. Mr. Ashcombe, she said, trying to smile. He came closer. May I sit? Of course. He lowered himself beside her, the distance between them slight but respectful. For a while, they said nothing. The wind moved through the budding branches, scattering petals like faint snow. Eleanor told me, he said finally. Marianne nodded. And what do you think? I think names from the past can sometimes sound louder than they should. She looked at him. He's a good man, intelligent, proper, everything I'm supposed to want. And do you? She didn't answer. Instead, she asked, what do you see when you look at me? He turned to her. I see someone who listens to the world like it's whispering poetry. I see someone who would rather feel deeply than be safe. Someone who gives too much, cares too fast, and forgives too easily. That sounds like a caution. It's an awe, he said softly. She swallowed. Then why do I feel afraid? Because the world asks you to be two women, one for them and one for yourself. And which one do you see? The real one. He reached for her hand. She let him take it. Then he said, if you choose him, I will disappear. I won't fight. I won't make scenes. But I will never believe it was because you didn't feel this between us. She looked at him, then truly looked. I'm not choosing anyone today, she said. But if I choose you, I want you. To be certain, I don't want to wake one morning and find the silence has taken you back. He nodded. Then I will fight it. Every day. They sat quietly until the orchard dimmed into early evening. That night, Marianne wrote in her journal. There are men who speak with flowers and poems. There are men who speak with silence and sighs. And then, there are men who say nothing yet still make you feel everything. Meanwhile, in her own room, Eleanor wrote a letter. Not to her aunt, not to London, but to herself, in the language of thought. She wrote of caution and courage. Of the way her sister had found something that did not align with society's expectations, but aligned perfectly with her spirit. Eleanor had spent years trying to protect Marianne from heartache. But now, she realized, love was not a matter of safety, it was a matter of willingness. Asterisk, asterisk. The willingness to risk. The willingness to speak. The willingness to listen, even when the words were difficult. She closed the letter and tucked it into a drawer. Then she went to sleep, knowing that perhaps, this time, she didn't need to do anything but stand still, and trust that her sister's heart knew its own way. The visit of Lord Bellamy 3 days after the letter from London. Willowmere Hall saw its peace interrupted by the rhythmic clatter of hooves on gravel. Marianne, seated at the drawing-room window, looked up from her journal just in time to see a dark, polished carriage arrive. Its wheels glistened as if freshly oiled, and the coat of arms on its side gleamed in the afternoon sun. Eleanor, who had been reading quietly by the fire, rose at once. She moved to the window and followed her sister's gaze. That will be him, she said softly. Lord Bellamy? Marianne asked, though she already knew the answer. Yes, Eleanor said, her tone as calm as ever. Our aunt's letter said, he might travel this way. The carriage door opened, and Lord Charles Bellamy emerged. He was dressed impeccably in a deep green coat trimmed with gold embroidery, a cream waistcoat, and polished boots that reflected the sun. His dark blonde hair was swept back neatly, and his confident posture betrayed the ease of a man accustomed to being welcomed wherever he went. Do you feel nervous? Eleanor asked, studying her sister's face. Marianne shook her head, though her pulse quickened. No, only curious. The arrival of the front door opened, and Lord Dashfield's voice could be heard greeting the visitor with polite formality. Moments later, the butler entered the drawing room to announce their guest, Lord Charles Bellamy. The butler intoned. Bellamy stepped in, offering a charming smile and a bow. Miss Whitmore, Miss Eleanor. It is a pleasure to see you again. Eleanor, will suffice. My lord. Eleanor replied with a courteous nod. You are most welcome at Willowmere. Marianne curtsied lightly. My lord, have I startled you with my sudden visit? Bellamy asked, his eyes resting on Marianne longer than was strictly polite. Not startled, she said carefully. Surprised, perhaps, then I shall count that as a victory, he said, taking a seat near the fire. The journey from London is long, but I could not resist the chance to see the countryside and to inquire after the company I missed in town. Marianne felt her cheeks warm. He spoke with such smooth assurance, as though his words were as finely tailored as his coat. There was no hesitation, no quiet pauses like Nathaniel's. And yet, something in that lack of hesitation felt rehearsed. An invitation that evening, over dinner, Bellamy charmed the company with tales of Italy, the gardens of Florence, the moonlit canals of Venice, the music echoing from the even Lord Dashfield, who rarely encouraged lively conversation, seemed intrigued. Marianne listened, but part of her mind drifted elsewhere, to a quiet orchard bench, to the weight of Nathaniel's hand in hers, to the promise of words unspoken. Whitmore, Bellamy said suddenly, turning to her, will you allow me the honor of escorting you on a walk tomorrow morning? I would love to show you something I brought back from my travels. Marianne hesitated. Eleanor caught the brief flicker of conflict in her eyes. Marianne began, but Eleanor stepped in smoothly. I am sure Marianne would be delighted, she said, offering her sister a glance that said, consider it. Do not refuse outright. Marianne forced a polite smile. Yes, of course. A quiet conversation. That night, Marianne sought Nathaniel in the library. He was there, as she had guessed, standing by the shelves with a book open in his hands, though his eyes were unfocused. He's staying, she said softly. Nathaniel turned. Bellamy, yes. He closed the book, his jaw tightening slightly. You knew him in London. Not well. Do you admire him? Marianne blinked. I admire his confidence. But confidence isn't always truth. Nathaniel's gaze softened. I won't compete with a man like that. Not because I don't want you, but because you're not something to be won. She stepped closer. Nathaniel, he reached for her hand. I only want you to know that I am here. No matter what attention he showers on you, I will remain as I am. Marianne felt a strange ache in her chest. That's all I want to hear. The walk the next morning was bright but cool. Bellamy was waiting outside, dressed for the occasion, holding a walking cane that looked more decorative than useful. Marianne joined him reluctantly, though her courtesy never wavered. They walked through the gardens, Bellamy speaking animatedly of art, culture, and society. He offered her a small package of Venetian glass pendant, delicate and blue. It made me think of you, he said, his tone warm but calculated. It's beautiful, Marianne admitted, but something about the gesture felt heavy, like a rope tied with expectation. When they returned, Nathaniel was standing near the steps, his coat unbuttoned, his eyes unreadable. He greeted Bellamy politely, but the air between them tightened, like a string pulled taut. An evening of contrasts. That evening, Willowmere hosted a smaller gathering for dinner, with Bellamy as the guest of honor. He spoke loudly, laughed often, and told stories that made the younger servants linger at the door, just to listen. Nathaniel, in contrast, remained quiet. He sat at the far end of the table, answering questions only when addressed directly, but his glances toward Marianne were filled with more meaning than all of Bellamy's words combined. After dinner, Bellamy approached Eleanor as Marianne and Nathaniel stood near the window. Your sister, Bellamy said, is exceptional. I must confess, I intend to court her properly. Eleanor gave him a measured smile. Marianne is indeed exceptional, but she is not a prize to be claimed by mere intention. Lord Bellamy. Bellamy chuckled lightly. I like your candor, Miss Eleanor. It's refreshing. A quiet moment later, when the guests had retired, Nathaniel found Marianne alone in the corridor. Did you enjoy your walk? He asked. She looked at him, her eyes full of questions. Do you want the truth? Always. I thought of you. The whole time, she said. His breath caught. Marianne, don't let silence steal this again, she whispered. Not while I'm still here. That night, Marianne sat at her desk, the Venetian pendant in her hand. It was beautiful, yes, but it did not stir her heart. Instead, she opened her journal and wrote, a gift may sparkle, but it is the hand that offers it which truly shines, and some hands speak louder in silence than others do in song. Eleanor's realization, in her own room. Eleanor thought deeply about her sister's predicament. Bellamy was, by all accounts, a suitable match, wealthy, respected, even kind in his own way. But suitability was not the same as happiness. Eleanor remembered her own lost chance at love years ago, a man she had admired, but who had been too timid, too bound by circumstance to act. She had chosen safety over uncertainty, and while she did not regret it, she often wondered what life might have been like had she chosen differently. Looking at Marianne now, Eleanor realized her sister's heart was already leaning toward Nathaniel, and perhaps, for once, That was exactly as it should be. A matter of the heart. The final Sunday of April began with the softest light sunlight filtered through gauzy clouds, casting Willowmere Hall in a silvery glow. It was the kind of morning that felt suspended between seasons, between decisions, between heartbeats. Marianne rose before the bell, dressing in a muted sage gown, her thoughts as overcast as the sky. Her sleep had been restless, filled with half-formed dreams, candlelit dances, Nathaniel's silent gaze, Lord Bellamy's polished voice, and now, today, she was to give her answer, though no one had said it aloud. The air in the house pulsed with expectation. Lord Bellamy had made his intentions unmistakably clear the evening before. "Miss Whitmore," he had said, after a quiet supper in the parlor, "my admiration for you has only grown since my return from Italy. I hope you will consider the possibility of a future together, one with every comfort and stability a man of my position can offer." He had spoken with grace and confidence, but not with love, and perhaps that, more than anything, was what troubled Marianne. In the garden she stepped out into the rose garden just after breakfast, hoping to clear her thoughts. Dew still clung to the petals, and birds moved quietly through the hedges. The air smelled of damp earth and lilac. She wasn't alone. Nathaniel stood near the trellis, one hand tucked into his coat, the other gently stroking the leaves of a climbing rose. When he turned and saw her, he didn't smile, but his face lit with something softer, something real. "Good morning," she said. "Is it?" She tilted her head. "Do you think it isn't?" "I think," he said, "that the morning doesn't know yet what kind of day it will become, like the rest of us." Marianne stepped closer. "May I walk with you?" He nodded. They moved in silence at first, footsteps muffled by the damp grass. Then, quietly, Nathaniel asked, "Has he proposed?" She hesitated, in not so many words, but his intent was clear. "And your answer?" "I haven't given it yet." Nathaniel stopped walking. "Do you love him?" Marianne turned to him fully. "You never ask questions unless you already know the answer." He held her gaze. "I ask because I need to hear it. For myself." "No," she said, "I don't love him." Nathaniel's shoulders eased. "Then why hesitate?" She looked away, because the world would applaud the match. "My family, our aunt's society. He is everything a sensible woman should want." "And yet," Nathaniel said, "you're not a sensible woman." She looked back at him, startled. "I mean that as praise," he added softly. "You live with your whole heart. You listen when others dismiss. You feel things most people ignore." "And what of you?" she asked. "Do you feel he stepped closer?" "More than I know how to explain." Then, more quietly, "But I've lived my life trying not to feel. Because when I did, I lost." Marianne's voice trembled. "I am not her, I know," he said, "but sometimes grief makes us see the past and the present, even when we don't want to." She reached for his hand. "Let it go," she said. "Let the past rest. If you want me, Nathaniel, take my hand and don't look back." He did. And neither of them spoke for a long while. Lord Bellamy waits inside. Eleanor sat with Lord Bellamy in the drawing room. The mood was cordial but cool. Bellamy was well manored as ever, sipping his tea with practiced poise. "I suspect Marianne is considering my offer as we speak," he said, not boastfully, but with quiet certainty. Eleanor raised an eyebrow. "You assume much, my lord." "I've known women like her," he said, swirling his cup. "Romantic spirits. They burn brightly, but they tire of the flame. In the end, they choose comfort." Eleanor's reply was immediate. "Marianne is not a candle. She is the sun, and she doesn't flicker for warmth. She shines for truth." Bellamy looked at her more closely. "You don't approve of me," he said. "I don't disapprove. I simply believe that affection must be mutual, and you think mine isn't." "I think yours is admiration," she said. "Respect, even desire, but not love." He studied her a moment longer. "You're very certain of your sister." I know her heart," Eleanor said, "and it already belongs elsewhere." A decision by late afternoon. The sky had brightened into a clear, calm blue. In the drawing room, Lord Bellamy rose as Marianne entered. She was composed, her expression serene. "Lord," she said. "Miss Whitmore," he replied, bowing. "You honor me with your presence. I wished to speak with you directly." He smiled. "I am listening." She paused, not out of hesitation, but reverence for his dignity, for the truth, for what must be said. "You are kind, intelligent, generous. You would make a fine husband." He nodded, though his smile faltered. "But I would not make a fine wife to you," she continued, "because I would always wonder about the man I didn't choose. The one who listens in silence, and speaks without words." Bellamy's expression shifted for a moment. He looked not like a nobleman but like a man. Just a man disappointed, but not bitter. "I see," he said quietly. "I hope you don't think me ungrateful." "I think," he said slowly, "that I have seldom misjudged a person so completely. Not because you've been cruel, but because you've been kind. I mistook your grace for affection. I'm sorry." He stood straighter. "Don't be. You've given me clarity. And that, too, is a gift." He bowed once more, this time with a depth that spoke of respect, not ceremony. "Goodbye, Miss Whitmore." Goodbye, my lord. After later, Marianne returned to the garden, where Nathaniel sat on the old stone bench beneath the oak tree. He looked up as she approached. He's gone, she said. Nathaniel nodded. And I told him the truth. And what is the truth? That I love someone else. He stood. I want to hear it, he said. She smiled. I love you, Nathaniel Ashcombe. He crossed the distance between them. And I love you, Marianne Whitmore. Then, for the first time, their lips met softly, slowly, reverently. It was not a kiss of passion, but of peace. A promise. A quiet surrender to what had always been there. Above them, the branches swayed gently in the breeze. Somewhere in the distance, the first notes of a bird's song rose into the evening, and for once, the world was quiet. Not with silence, but with stillness, the kind of stillness that comes after a decision has been made, not with certainty, but with faith. The stillness after the storm. It was not the sunrise that awakened Marianne, but a warmth slow and spreading, like honey stirred into tea. She opened her eyes, not in haste, but in calm, as though even her dreams had shifted to quiet pastures after months of restless galloping. The window was open. A breeze moved the curtains like whispered sighs. She lay still for a moment, cocooned in the hush, and listened to the house. No footsteps, no carriage wheels, no distant piano keys being pressed by memory, only birdsong, and the occasional creak of old wood stretching with the sun. The day before had ended without fanfare. No thunderclap of decision, no declarations before crowds. Just a truth exchanged beneath the oak tree, tender as the petals, that had fallen unnoticed at their feet. I love you, she had said, and I love you, he had replied, and in that simple exchange, all of London, all of society, all of expectation had vanished. Breakfast without questions, in the dining room. Eleanor sat reading a letter. She looked up as Marianne entered and gave her sister a quiet smile, not the kind worn for politeness, but the soft sort shared between those who have seen one another through every season of the soul. He left a note, Eleanor said, folding the page. Lord Bellamy. He thanked us for our hospitality and wished you happiness. Marianne took her seat, pouring tea without speaking. After a moment, she said, did he seem disappointed? Eleanor tilted her head. He seemed humble, but not unkind. I never meant to hurt him. You didn't, you merely told the truth. Most people do far more damage by pretending. They ate in silence for a while. Then Eleanor asked, and Nathaniel? Marianne blushed, but did not hide. We walked, we talked, we know where we stand now. Eleanor nodded. Good. There was a pause. You're not going to lecture me? Marianne teased. I think, Eleanor said, stirring her tea. I've learned to trust your judgment, even if it doesn't follow every rule of logic. Love rarely does. No, Eleanor agreed. But then again, neither does poetry, and both seem worth the risk. Nathaniel's letter later that morning, as Marianne walked the orchard path alone, a housemaid rushed out to find her. Miss, she said breathlessly, Mr. Ashcombe asked me to bring this to you. She held out a folded parchment, sealed with green wax. Marianne opened it, her heart thudding not with anxiety but with quiet wonder. My dearest Marianne, I have spoken so often with silence that I hardly know how to write these words, but I will try. You have changed the shape of my days. Not with thunder, but with the steady rain that softens even the hardest earth. You have shown me the courage and gentleness, the bravery in staying. I cannot offer you a castle, I cannot offer you London salons or Italian opera boxes, but I can offer you a life of slow mornings, honest conversation, and the kind of laughter that comes from deep peace. If you will have me, I would like to remain here with you. Not as a guest, not as a passing whisper, but as something permanent. Yours, Nathaniel. She read it twice. Then she pressed it to her chest and smiled. Eleanor's reflection that evening. As candlelight settled once more across the quiet hall, Eleanor sat with her, embroidery in the drawing room. Lord Dashfield entered, a brandy in hand, and paused beside her. You've seemed lighter this week, he said. I've let go of things I didn't realize I was carrying. He sat, such as the belief that one must be perfect before being loved, or that only a certain kind of man is worth loving. He raised an eyebrow. And now, I think, she said, threading her needle, that love isn't about worth, it's about recognition. He chuckled. You sound as though you're preparing to write sermons. She smiled. Perhaps I am. The proposal lay week past. Then another, and in the stillness, something grew. It rushed, not forced, but steady. Nathaniel spent more time at Willowmere, helping in the gardens, reading with Eleanor, walking with Marianne through every inch of the estate, as though mapping out the life he hoped to share. Then one morning, Marianne found him waiting by the rose arch, the same spot where they had first spoken alone. In his hand was a simple wooden box. I never imagined I'd be the kind of man who asked for anything more than a quiet day, he said, but I find myself wanting more. He opened the box. Inside was a ring, not ornate, not sparkling, but crafted with care. A small sapphire glowed at its center. This belonged to my mother, he said. It's not grand, but it has survived decades of storms, and I think it's meant for you now. Marianne didn't speak. She took the ring and placed it on her finger. Then she said, yes. The wedding they married in the garden in late May. The wisteria was in bloom, and the whole estate smelled of beginnings. Only close friends attended, including Colonel Harwood, who brought his dog in an unofficial role as ring-bearer. Eleanor stood beside her sister, her eyes bright with tears. You look like the end of a poem, she whispered, and the beginning of a new one, Marianne replied, when the vows were said, and the kiss exchanged. The garden erupted in soft claps and the quiet sound of a harp echoing across the lawn. There was no fanfare, no announcement in the papers, just joy, deep-rooted, undistracted joy. 1 year later a letter arrived at Willowmere the following spring. It was from Lord Bellamy. He had married a countess in the south of France, and was quite content. He included a line for Marianne. You were right to choose love over comfort. I have now learned the difference. Marianne read it aloud to Nathaniel as they sat on the porch, watching the orchard sway in the breeze. She rested her head on his shoulder, and he said, thank you for not choosing him. I never could have, she whispered. The sun dipped behind the hills, casting the house in golden quiet, and together, they watched the light fade.